Chapter 43, Disowned. I began calling Cindy again. It took a little doing, but I was able to get her number. I really had nothing to say to her. All I could do was brag about the wars I had been in. I thought she would be impressed by my gang activity like all the other girls I knew. She reacted exactly the opposite way of what I expected. Cindy scolded me and sometimes even hung up on me for bragging about my crimes. She cried when I told her about my run-in with the cops and being shot in the arm. She was really upset when I told her about the violations I received. "How could you let them do that to you?" she asked. "I thought you were tough." Cindy had graduated from high school and was accepted to Northwestern University. She was so happy and proud. I was secretly jealous. I asked to see her, but without hesitation she said no. I was used to Cindy's rejections, so it didn't faze me. It was what she said next that sticks in my head to this day. Cindy told me that out of all the guys she'd ever met, I was the one who came the closest to being special to her. She didn't appreciate I chose gangbanging and drugs over her and my own education. Her voice began changing as she held back tears. "Are you crazy? Do you think I'm stupid enough to meet with you and take a chance on getting shot? You don't even respect yourself, so sure you're gonna respect me enough to leave your gun at home. Yeah, right." By this time she was crying, and a tear was even rolling down my cheek. She wasn't finished. "Think about what you're doing. You're killing yourself and your friends. They're killing you too," Cindy said. "How many visitors did you have when you were in bed with swollen balls? How many of your so-called brothers were worried when you almost lost your arm? Don't be stupid. If they were really your brothers, they wouldn't be giving you drugs, alcohol, and then a gun so you could prove yourself. If they were your friends or your brothers, you wouldn't have to prove yourself." Cindy noticed I was crying. She paused, calmed down, and said more. "Listen, being poor should give you a stronger will to succeed. Not an excuse to have pity for yourself, to fail. My parents, our family are dirt poor. That's why I have to finish college, so that I can be their way out." Cindy hit a nerve with that remark. I snapped at her. "Your mother didn't abuse and abandon you. You don't know what suffering really is. Wait until nobody loves you," I screamed. Then I hung up on her. What hurt most about Cindy's words was that she spoke the truth. For the first time in my life, someone had taken the time and cared enough to tell me the truth, but I ignored it, classified it as bullshit, and took it as an attack against me. I thought I had control of everything around me, but I was the one being controlled. That's the last time I talked to Cindy for about 3 years, but I never forgot the things she said that night. After that call, I went and did the only things I knew would relieve my pain and anger. I got high, and then I got violent. I packed a 25 on my bike and then headed for the gangsters. I was so high, I could barely steer the bike. Gano was the only one that came with me. The things Cindy said were pumping in my head, and I kept getting angrier. By the time we got to Kimball and Armitage Avenues, the gangsters knew we were coming. They drove a car right at me. I jumped off my bike just in time. I was okay, but the bike was a mess. About 5 gangsters were running toward us while Gano helped me off the sidewalk. The gangsters who had tried to run me over were now on foot coming from behind. We were surrounded. I pulled out the 25 and fired at the ones behind us because that was our route back to the hood. They ran and hid, and the gangsters who were coming at us began shooting. Gano dropped his bike and ran zigzag between parked cars with me. I returned fire, one shot at a time to cover our running. I didn't want to waste all the bullets. The gangsters stopped and opened fire at the same time. Car windows were shattered and people screamed. We had just ducked between 2 cars, looking up momentarily when the shooting stopped to make sure they didn't charge us. The shooting had stopped, but the screaming continued. We looked and saw the gangsters running back toward their hood. Gano and I took off down Armitage towards Cadezi. On the way, we passed a lady who was on the ground screaming in pain from a gunshot wound. A girl, maybe her daughter, lay about 3 feet from her with a bullet hole in her head. I didn't even think about stopping and helping them. I was thinking about myself and myself only. By the time we got to Cadezi, we could hear the police sirens. Gano went one way, I went the other. I made it to the Cortland and Whipple clubhouse entrance without being seen. I went in and locked the door behind me. In the clubhouse, brothers and sisters from the Cortland and Whipple section became angry at me. They didn't appreciate the fact that I ran to their clubhouse knowing the police were after me. They didn't see me. Nobody saw me, I said. Still, they persisted in telling me not to do it again and reminded me that I was a king from Cadezi and Armitage, not from Cortland and Whipple. "I'm a king everywhere I stand," I said angrily. "Fuck you all," I said as I walked out the door. I carefully made my way towards Locas, ducking into the shadows every time I heard a car coming. Cindy's words were echoing in my mind like crazy. She was right. I knew it, but I didn't know what to do about it. I made it to Loca safely, but no one answered the door. I slept in the hallway, or at least tried. Every time I nodded out, nightmares appeared. Blood, violence, death, people being shot. I saw these things whenever I closed my eyes. At 8 in the morning, Loca opened the door. I entered and went directly to sleep. Later that afternoon, Loco came by and bitched at me for doing the shooting and then running for the safety of the Cortland and Whipple clubhouse. I yelled at Loco about all the things Cindy had said. I began bad-mouthing the Latin Kings and the whole gangbanging idea. "What the fuck do you care, motherfucker? As long as your drugs are sold," I screamed. "Get back in here, little Loco," Loco called out to me. "Fuck you, man. Fuck you," was my response. Spectators to our confrontation were now gathering in the hallway. "Come inside," Loco said. "Fuck that shit," I responded. "That man don't care for nobody but himself. Cállate," Loco warned me. "He's never out there protecting the hood. He don't know what's going on," I said. Loco came running out of the apartment. He grabbed me and slammed me against the wall. He grabbed me by the neck and said, "Punk, we don't need you, you pussy-ass motherfucker." Loco squeezed my neck even harder and harder. I was gagging and fighting for air. I felt like passing out. Déjalo ya, leave him already," Loco pleaded with Loco. At that moment, Lalo, Pito, and several other brothers arrived on the scene. Lalo and Pito pulled Loco away. When Loco finally released me, I fell to the floor gasping for air. I passed out momentarily. When I regained consciousness, Loco was still screaming at me. He was saying that I was no longer welcome at the Cortland and Whipple clubhouse, or on Cadetsy and Armitage for that matter. I was no longer to call myself a Latin king from Cadetsy and Armitage. The main heads of the kings had pretty much prohibited him or anyone else other than themselves from taking away my crown. Still, he warned me not to hang around Cadetsy and Armitage. He said actions were going to be taken to get me violated out of the kings. I could have asked to be taken out of the kings at that moment, but I didn't. I was still too much of a coward. I wasn't afraid to take a beating, but I didn't want to walk alone. I was afraid to be alone, not to belong. As long as I was a king, I could hang out at various sections in and outside the city of Chicago. Word about what I had said about the king spread throughout the neighborhood. Cadetsy and Armitage was no longer my safe haven. Not knowing what else to do, I went back to where all my craziness had begun, back to the Spanish lords. Chapter 44, The Way It Is. The Clemente High School, Tully School area had gone through a transformation. The Cobras and Disciples were now the majority at Clemente High School. The Lords no longer hung out by Tully, the Cobras did. Papo's family had moved away and rarely came around. When he did, he called himself an ex-lord. Kids who lived in areas where the Latin Kings, Spanish Lords, Insane Unknowns, or any gang united with them hung out were in danger if they attended Clemente High School. It didn't matter whether they were gang members or not. If a kid lived in those areas, he was an enemy of the Cobras and Disciples. Most of the Spanish lords who knew me had gone on to different things or were in jail. A couple of them had been killed. I began hanging out with Flaco from the Unknowns. We became inseparable. Flaco was tall and skinny, and he drank and smoked a lot. We had a lot in common, including being pretty much homeless. We stayed out all night most of the time. When we did sleep, it was usually in an apartment of a girl Flaco was seeing. Her name was Anita. She was an 18-year-old welfare mother. Anita was very voluptuous and sexy. I couldn't help but stare at her. She had 2 kids, a 2-year-old boy and a newborn girl. The kids had different fathers. One had been killed and the other one was doing 30 years in jail. Her apartment was a rat hole. There were roaches everywhere and she didn't do much about cleaning. Flaco and I lived on the edge. If rival gangs weren't shooting at us, we were doing the shooting. We called it having fun. Most of the time, we just shot at rivals as they drove by representing, but a couple of times, we made some serious hits. One of the first hits we did together, Pothead from the Lords joined us. Flaco and I debated whether or not we really trusted Pothead, but as he was the one supplying the weapons, we had no choice. It was a Friday night and the Cobras had been active since early that day. They were hanging out on Artesian Street between Potomac and Hearst Streets, 1 block west of Western Avenue. Every so often, they would let themselves be seen by sending a couple of their boys to Lemoyne Street and Western to taunt us. By nightfall, we were sick of it and had thought out a plan. At about 11 p.m., we went into action. One at a time, all 3 of us crossed Western between Hearst and Lemoyne, being careful so that the Cobras wouldn't see us. We walked through a gangway into the alley. From there, we walked in the shadows, crossed Hearst, and down the alley toward Potomac. We heard the Cobras partying just before we got to Potomac. We went into a gangway where we had a clear view of the Cobras across the street. We ducked down in the darkness out of sight. The parked cars were our cover. Flacco crawled to the end of the gangway to make sure there wasn't any cobras on our side of the street. He said there were people out all over the place, so we would have to be quick. All three of us had guns. We counted to 3 and ran out of the gangway onto Artesian, shooting simultaneously in the direction of the cobras. There was a lot of screaming going on from all directions. I could hear one of the cobras screaming, I'm hit, as we ran back through the gangway. We ran up the alley and through another gangway that led to Western. We crossed Western into another gangway and then up the alley to Hirsch. From there, we ran toward the unknown's hood. Pothead got a ride from some girl to his house. Flacco and I hid out with one of the unknowns until the next day. The hit was a success. It was time to rejoice in the violence. We were so proud of ourselves. Our action made others treat us respectfully, welcoming us into their homes, feeding us, giving us all the beer and marijuana we wanted, and plenty of ego-boosting praise. Even an older unknown's brother, a veteran of the gangbanging scene, complimented us. This was a big thing. The unknown was called Tarzan. He was a big, wild-looking guy in his late 20s. He was a career gangbanger. Tarzan was living with a short, chubby Puerto Rican girl named Maria. Maria wasn't a gangbanger, but she did nothing to keep Tarzan from doing it or from teaching their 3 kids about it. They had 2 boys and 1 girl. The 2 boys were 10 and 8 years old, and the girl was 5. All 3 kids knew how to represent the unknown sign and also knew their handshake. Tarzan and Maria thought that was cute. When Maria asked them what they wanted to be when they grew up, the 2 boys said unknowns and the girl said a Latin queen. Tarzan bragged about how he had taught his boys to always hit first when faced with a confrontation. And if they don't go down, hit them with something harder than your fist. Ain't that right, boys? Tarzan proclaimed. Yeah, man, with the bat. Right, Dad? One of his kids answered. Tarzan laughed. Maria laughed. We all laughed. We got high in the same room with the kids. Tarzan would blow marijuana smoke in their faces and share his beer with them. Then we would all sit back and watch to see how they reacted. Saturday morning, Flacco and I walked to Anita's, smoking a joint on the way, as if nothing had happened. In my mind, the events of the night before were just a game. Nothing had happened. At Anita's, we bragged about what we did and laughed about hearing a cobra scream in pain. That's what we talked about all day. We couldn't go outside. Lahada would be all over the place asking questions. By Saturday night, 2 lords had been picked up by the gang crime division for crimes we committed. The 2 lords were charged for murder and attempted murder. 2 cobras were shot that night. One died on the scene and the other was in the hospital with 2 bullet wounds in his abdomen. Usually, whoever was arrested for a crime would keep quiet about who really did it, but this time it was different. One of the lords who got arrested decided to save himself and pointed Pothead out as one of the triggermen. Pothead was offered less time if he named his partners in crime, but he didn't. He was advised by a public pretender to take a plea bargain that the state was offering. Pothead pleaded guilty on both counts and was sentenced to 50 years with a chance for parole with good behavior after serving a minimum of 20 years. The lord who testified against Pothead was found dead at the lakefront about 2 days after he was released from jail. The rumor was that the police told the lords which one of the 2 guys apprehended did the talking. The only thing important to Flacco and me was that we didn't get questioned regarding the crimes. 2 weeks later, we were at it again. The Cobras retaliated several times in revenge. They didn't kill anyone, but they shot a couple of unknowns. Innocent bystanders, however, were not so lucky. On one of their hits, a stray bullet fatally wounded a 3-year-old boy. The kid was in a coma for a couple of weeks before he died. Instead of taking this as a sign that it was time to stop the killing, we used it as a reason to kill again. No way could we permit a child to be killed in our hood by our rivals without getting revenge. It was about this time that my luck with girls came to an end. My violent nature no longer got me any girl I wanted. Even the ugliest, easiest girls in the hood avoided me. It never crossed my mind that my hygiene needed attention. I didn't bathe or change clothes for weeks at a time. I spent most of my time drinking and getting high. I rarely ate full meals anymore. They were a luxury. Getting high made me forget about being hungry. I slept in the gutter most of the time. Rooftops, benches, hallways, gangways, call them what you want. They're still the gutter. When winter came along, I really suffered. I slept at Anita's most of the time, but sometimes I knocked on the door and nobody opened. Then I had to sleep in the hallway or go hang out with the bums under the train tracks near Damon Avenue. The bums would get a fire going in a garbage can and they had liquor to keep warm inside. I was dead drunk and lost. I wanted to have sex so bad. My sexual urge, coupled with the need for money, food, and shelter, led me to experience with homosexuality at the age of 17. Oh, man. An older gentleman picked me up one night as I was searching for somewhere to sleep. He pulled up next to me and invited me to get high. As we drove around, we talked about sports, women, and women in sport. His name was Freddie. He was a light-skinned black man. He was about 45 years old with a medium build and a little overweight. He could speak Spanish. He invited me over to his apartment for a beer. I gladly agreed. I might just get a comfortable place to sleep, I thought. Freddie somehow knew I would agree. He pulled into a parking space in front of his apartment just as I asked him where he lived. I didn't even know where we were. I was too busy talking shit to notice what streets he had taken. Let's go upstairs. I'll order some pizza to go with the beer, Freddie said as he led me into a multi-unit apartment building. I didn't recognize the area we were in, but I knew we were out of the hood. The streets were clean, there was no vandalism on the walls, and it was very quiet outside. I followed Freddie up to a third-floor apartment. Freddie's apartment was very nicely furnished, clean, with pictures of kids he said were his all over the walls and shelves. Freddie went into a bedroom, came out with a t-shirt, and handed it to me. Go take a shower and give me your clothes so I can wash them, Freddie said. Go take a shower and give me your clothes so I can wash them, Freddie said as he led me to the bathroom. He stood there while I got naked and took my clothes one piece at a time. I cleaned up. Man, you stink, Freddie said. Cleaned up and put the t-shirt on. Freddie was quickly there to escort me to the living room. He had prepared sandwiches while I was taking a shower. As I ate, Freddie asked where I lived and where my family was. I didn't answer. Someone should be taking care of you, Freddie said. You're a beautiful kid. Dirty and stanky as you are, I think so, Freddie said. I bet you haven't had sex in a long time. He laughed and asked if I wanted to see an X-ray movie. I agreed. As we watched the movie, we drank beer and smoked weed. Now that's gotta be real awkward. Two grown-ass men watching an X-rated movie together, smoking weed and drinking beer. Freddie kept saying, wow, look at that. I bet that makes you hard, about different scenes in the movie. Oh, hell yeah, I said, laughing. You don't have a heart on? Let me see. I bet you don't, Freddie teased. I laughed and continued watching the movie. I knew you weren't hard, Freddie said. You don't even know what a pussy looks like. Oh, man, I don't even know if I want to keep reading you guys this book, man. This shit's starting to turn me down. I looked at him, half laughing and half shocked. Come on, let me see it. I stared at him, not knowing what to do. I had never been approached sexually by a man before. I felt the same motionless shock and fear I felt the first time I went on a gang hit. Freddie grabbed... Alright, man. Let me fast forward to get past this stuff right here. You guys don't want to hear about this crap. The chapter's almost over anyway. I'm going to read the last paragraph and kill this. Even with Freddie's kindness, there were times when I thought I was going to die. On the nights when I couldn't stay at Freddie's, I sat in the hallways crying because it was cold. I ate very little and slept less. The stores in the neighborhood prohibited me from entering because of all the shoplifting I did. By summer, I looked like a zombie. Most people thought I was shooting up heroin and avoided hanging out with me. Freddie moved away and stopped coming around looking for me. To this day, the relationship I had with Freddie that winter haunts me. It should.